In 2012, it occurred in Guangdong, China. I was in my second year at that time. I didn't want to work part-time during my summer vacation, so I returned to my hometown. It was past 8 o'clock in the evening when I returned to the village in our small southern villages. The streets were usually less crowded than during the day, but that day there was no one. I was walking down the alley when I noticed a strange phenomenon. For a few days now, I'd noticed a circle of scattered paper dust in front of every house's door. These doors were closed, and this paper charm was probably to ward off the evil spirits. That was when I realized why there was no one on the street tonight. Someone had died in the village. Even though I didn't believe in superstitious things, I definitely still felt the hair on the back of my neck. So I didn't dare to stay in the street and dashed home shouting, "Dad! Mom! I'm back!" I exclaimed loudly. I went to school in Shanghai at the time, which was not far from home, but there was only one break per semester. So when they heard my voice, my parents greeted me cheerfully, and I noticed that my mother's face was very happy, while my father seemed a little concerned. My father approached me and pushed me into the house, refusing to let me speak. When I saw my father's worried expression, I felt strange. When my father pushed me into the house, he quickly shut the door and looked at me, terrified, as if there was something dangerous inside. When my mother noticed me asking, she explained why. It was discovered that there was a deceased person in the village and the death seemed strange. It was amusing to hear that my hometown was still superstitious about these things in this day and age. "Mom, we can't meddle in other people's domestic affairs, so don't believe these rumors," I explained. My father was irritated when he heard me say this because I didn't believe it. Then he came over and told me about Mrs. Lan's death. Miss Lan went to town a few days ago to buy food when a small truck behind her lost control and rushed towards her. Miss Lan was crushed by the wheel without having time to react. The entire car was smashed to the front. She died on the spot, and the scene was described as tragic. The most terrifying thing was not this, but Miss Lan's body, which could not close her eyes or close her mouth as if she was resentful. After that, when Miss Lan's family asked the monk to keep an eye on her, the monk stated that Miss Lan had died unexpectedly before the end of her life. As a result, Miss Lan's family sought someone to carry the coffin in accordance with the old custom. They carried the coffin for several days and nights and were still hanging around, which made my father very nervous and made him warn me not to go out at night. I agreed, but I didn't give it much thought at the time. My father truly understood me. He knew I always did my own thing and held at me. My mother was nagging next to me, and hearing her nags irritated me. So I told them I was tired and went to bed early so I wouldn't have to argue any longer. But that night, I had a strange dream, or rather, a nightmare. I had a dream that I was wandering through the village streets and alleys like a maze that I couldn't get out of. I ran into some friends on the street and went for a walk. Actually, even though we didn't get the full experience of a big city there, the beautiful scenery here was really nice. Especially the hill behind the village, because in recent years, people have paid a lot of attention to the ecological environment. The fresh air and the overlapping mountains was a good place. We kept playing like crazy until after 9 o'clock at night, when we split up and went to our respective houses. When I got home and saw that no one else was there, I remembered that my father had told me about Miss Lan's family carrying the coffin, but I didn't believe it and I was not afraid. However, as I entered the alley on the west side of the village, I was startled to hear a strange sound from behind. When I turned around, I saw 4 strange-dressed men approaching me, carrying a large coffin. They were all dressed in gray cloth with red ribbons. Only then did I realize I had encountered the coffin-carrying individuals sought by the Tran family. These people would greet everyone they met, but it was said that if the person responded, the pain of the deceased would be transferred to that person. They had most likely been carrying for a few nights and haven't been able to talk to anyone. They took charge as soon as they saw me. They greeted me enthusiastically, but I had lived here since I was a child, and I know the rule: don't answer or say anything. But that person's words continued to irritate me. My throat and eyes were itchy and I really wanted to respond. Also, my mind appeared to be in control at the time, and the answer was about to be said. At this point, a young man rushed from behind, holding an SLR camera, photographing people carrying coffins. I recognized the young man as a visitor from somewhere else, not knowing how he ended up in our village. He was extremely inquisitive about everything. The man was unaware of the carrying coffin rule, so he approached the people carrying the coffin. The coffin carriers rejoiced when they saw this person take the initiative to speak. I believed the young man was my age, and I was concerned that he would do something bad. But before I could say anything, I noticed 4 people carrying coffins turned their heads to look at me sullenly, as if they were afraid I would ruin the plan. Those people's stares gave me chills. I was terrified. I knew people who accepted this type of carrying coffin were bad people. I was shocked, so I kept my mouth shut. To avoid trouble, I could only turn my head and walk towards the house. The young man continued to inquire. Those who carry the coffin appeared to deliberately turn the coffin's head towards the young man while answering. That night I ran home, but my father scolded me so harshly that I didn't dare to tell him about what had happened that night, so I went to bed. When I woke up on Monday morning, my mind was dizzy and a little sore. I was not sure if it had anything to do with what happened the night before. I staggered out of my room to find my parents eating breakfast and discussing a car accident. I moved forward immediately and listened to my father's words. But after hearing it, I got a chill down my spine and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The dead man turned out to be the young man who came to our village last night with an SLR camera. He stayed in a small hotel in our village last night, but he only checked out and walked out in the morning. A large garbage truck passed him and then lost control. The garbage truck sped up and slammed into the young man. He died on the spot, under the wheel, without having the time to react. I felt a pang of fear and guilt as soon as I heard the news. If I had stopped him last night, he wouldn't have died. But if he hadn't died, I would have replaced him. What about me? There were no solutions to these problems, but there was a legend here, and those who answered the coffin driver will have a few years of bad luck, and in the worst case, death.